I'd like to welcome everyone to this special event titled Language as a Bridge, where we will explore how languages are a metaphorical bridge to many aspects of life. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Madeline Klosky, and I hold a master's degree in TESOL, or Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages from the University of Alabama, and a bachelor's in linguistics and Spanish from the University of Florida. As a grantee of the Fulbright Spain program, an exchange agreement between the U.S. Department of State and Spanish government, I have been here at the University of La Laguna since September as an English teaching assistant for classes and with professors and students across the university. This is my community engagement project, and I would like to thank you all for attending and supporting me in making this happen. I would like to thank Javier for reserving this space for the event and setting up the technological equipment. This event is being recorded and will be up on the event page shortly after we conclude. I would also like to thank our interpreters who have volunteered their time and energy to make this event truly bilingual. We have Irene Lopez and Beatriz Bravo, both about to finish their Masters of Conference Interpreting here at the university. Both are certified interpreters in English, Spanish, and French. I would also like to thank the Tenerife natives who have willingly shared their language learning experiences to be included in this event. Javier, Alexia, and Kevin, I can't thank you enough. I'm excited to introduce you all to some of the linguist connections I have made through research and teaching experiences in recent years, in order of who will be presenting today. Reynaldo Cabrera Perez is coming to us from California on the west coast of the US, a PhD student of education and a polyglot of 7 languages. Reynaldo has expertise in bilingual education, psycholinguistics, and childhood and young adulthood language development with a focus on developmental language disorders. Kate Tomaskovic is our second speaker. Currently located in Virginia on the east coast of the US, she holds a Master's of Education in TESOL and is an ESL teacher and the International Program Director at a boarding school. And last but not least, Grace Demuriz is coming to us from Gainesville, Florida, where she is a PhD candidate in linguistics and with a focus on psycholinguistics. How this event is going to work is I will share the Canarian testimonials, which are in English, and present the translations on the screen in Spanish. Then each speaker will respond to these testimonials with a prepared talk. Reynaldo will be giving his talk bilingually in Spanish and English. The other 2 talks will be consecutively interpreted into Spanish by our lovely interpreters. We will have a few minutes for questions after each talk. And without further ado, I will present the first Canarian testimonial after I do this introduction again in Spanish. Okay, and this time I'm gonna go through the slides. Okay, hola a todos y a todas. Antes de nada quisiera darles las bienvenidas a este evento especial titulado La lengua como puente, en el que vamos a explorar cómo la lengua es como un puente metafórico en varios aspectos de la vida. Para los que no me conozcan, un momento. Un momento. Me llamo Madeline Klosky y tengo un máster en enseñanza de inglés para hablantes de otros idiomas de la Universidad de Alabama y un grado en lingüística y español de la Universidad de Florida. Como becaria con el programa Fulbright España, un acuerdo de intercambio entre el Departamento del Estado de Estados Unidos y el gobierno español, estoy aquí desde septiembre como docente auxiliar, dando clases y trabajando con profesores y alumnos a través de la universidad. Este evento hoy es mi proyecto de participación comunitaria y me gustaría darles las gracias a todos por asistir y apoyarme para que se celebre. Quiero dar las gracias a Javier por hacer la reserva de esta aula y configurar el equipo técnico para hacer que funcione este evento en modo híbrido. Además, estamos grabando el evento y pondremos la grabación en la página web después. Quiero agradecer también a las intérpretes que han ofrecido su tiempo y energía voluntariamente para hacer posible que este evento sea ciertamente bilingüe. Tenemos a Irene López y Beatriz Bravo, que están acabando con su máster en interpretación de conferencias aquí en la universidad. Las dos son certificadas en interpretación con inglés, español y francés. Quiero agradecer a los nativos tinerfeños que han compartido voluntariamente sus experiencias sobre aprender idiomas para ser incluidos en este evento. Javier, Alexia y Kevin, no puedo darles las suficientes gracias. Y este es donde estamos o de donde somos. Ok, pues ahora estoy muy emocionada por presentarles las conexiones lingüísticas que he hecho a través de diferentes experiencias investigando y enseñando en los últimos años como oradores. Reinaldo Cabrera Pérez, desde California en la costa oeste de Estados Unidos, estudiante de doctorado en educación y políglota de 7 idiomas. Reinaldo es experto en educación bilingüe, psicolingüística y desarrollo del lenguaje en niños y adultos jóvenes, con un enfoque en los trastornos del desarrollo del lenguaje. Kate Tomaskovic va a presentar después, actualmente ubicada en Virginia, en la costa este de los Estados Unidos. Tiene un máster en educación en TESOL y es profesora de inglés como segunda lengua. Y además la directora de un programa internacional en un internado. Y por último, pero no menos importante, Grace Demuris desde Gainesville, Florida, donde es candidata doctoral en lingüística con un enfoque en psicolingüística. Durante el evento compartiré los testimonios canarios en inglés y estarán las traducciones en la pantalla en español. Luego, cada hablante experto responderá a los testimonios con una presentación que han preparado. Reinaldo hará la suya bilingüe y los demás serán con interpretación consecutiva. Tendremos un par de minutos para preguntas después de cada charla. Sin más preámbulos, les presento el primer testimonio canario.
Based on my experience and being aware of the importance of mastering English as a second language for your self-development and as a key component to improve your communication and learning skills in an everyday, more connected and technological or digital world, where distances and language are not more a barrier between people sharing and understanding, I really push English into my daughter's life from a very early stage. She always has been exposed to media and content in English, and as in the family environment we cannot use English as a viable communication tool because neither my wife or any other family members are capable of simple talk in this language, I try to be a reference for her, introducing words, concepts, small talk, and different media in English, songs, videos, and children books. This was awfully painful at the beginning, as my daughter felt much more comfortable using Spanish and refused angrily any sort of interaction in English. And when forcefully was pushed into consuming media in English, just enjoyed the pictures and the cartoons without much knowledge about the story's meaning. As a complementary measure, I registered her in a bilingual school since nursery, That happens to be located close to our home, so it was an easy deal, except for expenses, as being a private school is not free, and we have to pay a somewhat steep monthly fee. But I see it as an investment in my daughter's development and future instead as an expense. Although I thought initially that the school life would be fully English oriented, it happens to be a more mixed experience where they use mainly Spanish as a core language and English as a secondary language, but with native speakers as teachers and several subjects taught only in English. The interactions between children on their own and between school staff and children are usually in Spanish, so it was not what I was looking for, and it was some sort of a letdown. But as years pass by, Alexia really has been improved her English skills steadily, and nowadays she is 10 years old, and her English skills probably have surpassed mine, at least in pronunciation and ease of use. So no worries in that regard. And I clearly see that this approach has paid off as expected.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, you can hear me great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ronaldo. Today, we're going to delve into the fascinating topic of bilingual development and explore how it serves as a bridge connecting individuals to their culture and society. Language is not merely a tool for communication, it's a gateway to understanding and connecting with the world around us. Buenas tardes a todos los presentes. Mi nombre es Reinaldo. En esta charla vamos a hablar sobre el fascinante tema del desarrollo bilingüe y explorar cómo las dos lenguas conectan a las personas con su cultura y sociedad. El lenguaje no es simplemente una herramienta de comunicación, es una puerta de entrada para comprender y conectarnos con el mundo que nos rodea. But first, we must start from the basics. We can ask ourselves, what percentage of the world is bilingual? That is, someone who speaks more than one language. It turns out that this question is more difficult to answer than we might expect, because it has to do with what we conceive to be a bilingual speaker or a multilingual speaker. You might hear it as being used to refer to someone who uses more than one language. And we can look at census data that varies by country, and the wording that is used to answer this type of questions might vary as well. In an article published in Psychology Today, Francois Grosjean explored the challenges of accurately counting bilingual individuals in society. It has been estimated that more than half of the world's population is bilingual, yet determining precise numbers remain elusive. However, current estimates vary from 50 to 70%. Ahora, empezando desde el principio, ¿qué porcentaje del mundo es bilingüe? Es decir, alguien que habla más de un idioma. Resulta que esta pregunta es más difícil de responder de lo que podríamos esperar, porque tiene que ver con lo que concebimos como un hablante bilingüe o multilingüe. Por ejemplo, los datos del censo varían según el país y la formulación de preguntas también. En un artículo publicado en Psicología de Hoy, François Grosjean exploró los desafíos que implica contar con precisión a las personas bilingües en la sociedad. Se ha estimado que más de la mitad de la población mundial es bilingüe, pero sigue siendo difícil determinar cifras precisas. Sin embargo, las estimaciones actuales varían entre el 50 y el 70%. I am a passionate advocate for bilingualism and culture exchange. I grew up in a multicultural society where I was exposed to various languages from a young age. Crecí en una sociedad multicultural donde estuve expuesto a varios idiomas desde una edad temprana. Y para darles un ejemplo, voy a usar mi propia historia. Yo nací en La Habana, Cuba, y a la edad de 9 años emigré para España, para Galicia, donde aprendí gallego en la región mientras estaba estudiando en la escuela. pero al mismo tiempo estuve tomando clases de francés y de inglés. Y pensé que estar expuesto a varios idiomas era algo natural, pero no fue hasta cuando me mudé para los Estados Unidos a la edad de 16 años que noté que hay muchos beneficios en aprender una segunda o una tercera lengua. Fue aquí cuando empecé a aprender portugués, ya que sabía gallego y era un poco más fácil para mí, y italiano. Pero no fue hasta que comencé mis estudios de licenciatura en la universidad que comencé a estudiar ruso y encontré una gran fascinación por la lengua aún más. Esta educación me inculcó un profundo aprecio por la diversidad lingüística y me inspiró a explorar las conexiones entre el idioma, la cultura y la sociedad. But we can also look at different percentages of bilingual speakers in the world. Since all of you are located in Europe, why not focus on the European context? We can see that 56% of the population is bilingual. While this data may not be the most current, the nature of language use may not vary tremendously. For example, we can look at Luxembourg. It suggests that significant fluctuations are unlikely to happen over time, and this stability is supported by the country's recognition of 3 official languages, in this case, Luxembourgish, French, and German. También podemos mirar el porcentaje de hablantes bilingües en el mundo, en el contexto europeo, donde están ubicados todos vosotros. Podemos ver cómo el 56% de la población es bilingüe. Y soy consciente de que estos datos pueden que no sean los más actualizados, pero la naturaleza del uso del idioma sugiere que es poco probable que hayan cambios significativos a lo largo del tiempo. But more specifically, we can focus in the Spanish context. We can see the distribution of language use by the different autonomous communities here in Spain, where Castilian Spanish will be the most shared language across the board, followed by Catalan, which varies from 19 to 20%. En el contexto de España, también podemos ver la distribución de los idiomas utilizados en las diferentes comunidades autónomas. El castellano siendo el idioma más compartido entre todas, seguido del catalán de un 19 a un 20%, según las cifras reportadas en los últimos años. But we can also look at the linguistic diversity in the world. Countries such as Papua New Guinea, which over 800 languages present, which demonstrates how rich and culture relevant communication is in this country. También podemos fijarnos en países con una rica diversidad lingüística. En el caso de Papúa Nueva Guinea, con más de 800 idiomas presentes. But in terms of second language learning, we can see how, according to the Duolingo report in 2022, we can see that English is one of the most learned languages, with over 100 countries being learned this language. Y el reporte de Duolingo de 2022 también nos indica que inglés es uno de los idiomas más aprendidos debido a que fue aprendido en más de 100 países. But now, it turns out that the greatest challenge to bilingualism is characterized by what we can refer to as anecdotal or impressionistic myths about how language learning can affect people's lives and well-being. So in this short clip, I'm going to show you how it illustrates some of the common misconceptions we hold about bilingualism. And some of you may be familiar with this show from the United States called I Love Lucy. Ahora, resulta que el mayor desafío del bilingüismo se caracteriza por lo que podemos denominar como mitos anecdóticos o impresionistas sobre cómo el aprendizaje de idiomas puede afectar la vida y el bienestar de las personas. En este breve video les mostraré un ejemplo común sobre el aprendizaje de una segunda lengua. Y algunos de vosotros puede que estén familiarizados con este programa de los Estados Unidos llamado I Love Lucy.
Ricky, what are you going to say when you meet your grandmother?
Buenos dias, abuela.
Very good, very good.
What are you going to say, Mommy?
What, dear?
What are you going to say when you meet my mother?
Oh, bonus dies, Maydree.
Buenos dias, May 3. Honey, it's buenos dias, madre.
I don't think that's very nice, making fun of my Spanish.
Well, you've been making fun of my English for 15 years.
Well, that's different. Spanish is a foreign language.
Well, English is a foreign language to me.
Well, the way you speak it is to me, too.
In this clip, Lucy says that Spanish is a foreign language to her and that she will never learn the language properly. En este clip pudimos observar cómo Lucy dice que el español es un idioma extranjero para ella y que nunca lo aprendería correctamente. But we can hear the same sentiments in the testimonial shared by Javier about his daughter Alexia. The initial phase was particularly challenging. Javier's daughter, Alexia, preferred speaking Spanish and will resist engaging in English. When they manage to encourage her to consume media in English, she will focus solely on the visuals, largely ignoring or not understanding the storyline. As we can see by this example, Alexia is using different strategies to familiarize herself with English. En uno de los testimonios compartidos, Javier habla sobre su hija Alexia. Él menciona cómo la fase inicial fue particularmente desafiante. Su hija Alexia prefería el castellano y se resistía a hablar inglés. Cuando sus padres lograron animarla, fue a través de videos y animaciones en inglés. Ella se concentraba únicamente en las imágenes, ignorando o no entendiendo en gran medida la trama. Como podemos ver en este ejemplo, Alexia está utilizando diferentes estrategias para familiarizarse con el inglés. Pero como vamos a ver ahora, aprender un segundo idioma y ser bilingüe tiene muchos más beneficios más allá de la comunicación. What have we learned about bilingualism? That's something that we can ask ourselves. First of all, bilinguals are not simply two monolinguals in one, so we can disregard this idea of being monolingual in two languages. En el ámbito de investigación, ¿qué hemos aprendido sobre el bilingüismo? En primer lugar, los bilingües no son simplemente dos monolingües en uno, por lo que podemos descartar esta idea de ser monolingüe en dos idiomas. We now know that the bilingual language system is fundamentally open and that both languages are in continuous interaction. The research is clear that when bilinguals listen to read or speak, both languages are active and competitive for selection for use. And these effects are quite persistent at all levels of language, at the level of words, sound, and grammatical structure. And we can observe this in all kinds of bilinguals, from highly balanced, but also in beginning learners of a second language. But also we can observe this in languages that are similar to each other in the case of Spanish and Catalan, or languages that are very different like English and Mandarin. And even across modalities, for example, comparing spoken and sign language. What this means is that there are no hard borders between language and the bilingual language system. It's not that we can turn language on and off. Ahora, sabemos que el sistema lingüístico bilingüe es fundamentalmente abierto y que ambas lenguas están en continua interacción. La investigación es clara en que cuando los bilingües escuchan, leen o hablan, ambos idiomas están activos y competitivos en la selección de su uso. Y estos efectos son bastante persistentes en todos los niveles del lenguaje, a nivel de palabras, sonido y estructura gramatical. Puede ser observado en todo tipo de bilingües, desde muy equilibrados hasta estudiantes principiantes de una segunda lengua. Se puede observar en idiomas similares entre sí, como el español y el catalán, o en idiomas muy diferentes como el inglés y el mandarín. E incluso entre modalidades, por ejemplo, el lenguaje hablado y el de señas. Lo que esto significa es que no existen límites estrictos entre los idiomas y el sistema lingüístico bilingüe. No es que podamos encender y apagar el lenguaje como un interruptor. So, what is the consequence of this interaction, of this language competition? The idea here is that when you speak in one language, you are bilingual, as I am one now. You not only have to select a word in the appropriate language, but you also need to resolve the potential competition across them. And this happens all the time, in this sense that the research community has adopted this metaphor of bilinguals becoming experimental jugglers. Entonces, ¿cuál es la consecuencia de esta interacción de la competencia lingüística? La idea aquí es que cuando hablas un idioma, eres bilingüe, como lo soy yo ahora. no solo tienes que seleccionar una palabra en el idioma apropiado, sino que también debes resolver la competencia potencial entre ellas. Y esto sucede todo el tiempo. Es en este sentido que la comunidad investigadora ha adoptado esta metáfora de los bilingües convirtiéndose en malabaristas experimentales. We know that bilinguals and monolinguals are not the same people, as we already established. They may differ in different ways that affect their performance. In the case of bilinguals, within bilinguals, we know that there are differences in the age of acquisition, proficiency, dominance, language environment, and even social networks. And within monolinguals and bilinguals, there may be variability in terms of immigration, education, socioeconomic status, and lifestyle. Los bilingües y los monolingües no son las mismas personas, como establecimos anteriormente. Pueden diferir en formas que afectan su desempeño. Entre los bilingües sabemos que hay diferencias entre la edad de adquisición, la proficiencia, la dominancia, el medio ambiente donde usan los idiomas y con quién los hablan. Y entre los monolingües y bilingües también hay diferencias entre estatus migratorio, nivel de educación, estatus de económico y estilo de vida. Now, I will present you with some research findings from one of the many studies in bilingualism research. The McLaughlin et al. 2004 study's main purpose was to answer the following question. What happens in the brains of college students enrolled in a foreign language class during the first weeks and months of study? To do this, they tested students at the University of Washington in the US. And these students were enrolled in an introductory French class and compared them to another group of students who were non-language learners, who were not enrolled in a French class and had no previous exposure to French. They used a semantic priming lexical task, which basically means that they were asking students whether or not a word was real or not. For example, we can look at the word in English here at the bottom. It says, is the word book? Is that a real word or not? So they will press yes, because it is a real word. And what about the word blart? Is that real or not? And they will say no. Ahora, les presentaré algunos de los resultados de uno de los muchos estudios sobre el bilingüismo. El objetivo principal del estudio de McLaughlin y compañeros del 2004 fue responder a la siguiente pregunta. ¿Qué sucede en el cerebro de los estudiantes universitarios matriculados en una clase de lenguaje extranjera durante las primeras semanas y meses de estudio? Para responder esto, ellos hicieron pruebas a estudiantes en la Universidad de Washington, en los Estados Unidos, y estos estudiantes estaban inscritos en una clase de introducción al francés y fueron comparados con un grupo de estudiantes que no eran estudiantes del idioma, que no estaban inscritos en clases de francés y que no habían tenido exposición previa al francés tampoco. Utilizaron tareas léxicas de preparación semántica, lo cual significa que les preguntaban si una palabra era real o no. Por ejemplo, podemos considerar la palabra libro. Les preguntaban, ¿esta palabra existe o no? Ellos dirían sí. Y una palabra que sería inventada como lunífero, en este caso sería no. Y esto fue usado con palabras en francés de libros de texto. But how did they measure this? Well, they used EEG or electroencephalography. And using something that looks like a swimming cap, as we can see here in this image, where we can attach electrodes which capture a continuous measure of electric brain activity. Then we can use this brain activity to look at real-time data in a specific time frame. And what is remarkable is that after 14 hours of learning, the students show some significant results. Pero ¿cómo midieron esto? Bueno, utilizaron EEG o electroencefalograma con algo que se asemeja a un gorro de natación. Podemos colocar electrodos que captan una medida continua de la actividad eléctrica del cerebro. Luego, podemos observar la actividad cerebral en tiempo real y en un periodo de tiempo específico también. Podemos observar en este estudio que después de 14 horas de instrucción, hay resultados notables y significativos. The main takeaway here of this study is that these new learners were they were basically guessing for behavioral responses, while their brains showed that they were beginning to recognize the French words. La conclusión de este estudio es que estos nuevos estudiantes estaban adivinando palabras si existían o no, pero sus cerebros mostraron que estaban comenzando a reconocer las palabras en francés, lo cual es impresionante. We can see that the human brain is capable of a lot of things, and early life experiences are important for language development. Going back to Javier, he said that he pushed English into his daughter's life from a very early stage. For example, Alessia has always been exposed to media and content in English. He has always aimed to introduce her to the language by incorporating words, concepts, and different forms of media such as songs, videos, and children's books. Podemos ver que el cerebro humano es capaz de muchas cosas y que las experiencias de vida tempranas son importantes para el desarrollo del lenguaje. Regresando nuevamente al testimonio de Javier, mencionó que le dio a conocer el inglés a su hija desde una etapa muy temprana. Por ejemplo, Alexia siempre estaba expuesta a diferentes plataformas de aprendizaje y contenido en inglés. El objetivo de Javier siempre ha sido presentarle el idioma, incorporando palabras, conceptos y diferentes formas comunicativas, como canciones, vídeos y libros para niños. We have learned about the benefits of being bilingual and learning a second language. Now, for second language learners like myself, I consider them as bilinguals from the moment of language learning. If we rethink learners as bilinguals, then good things are going to happen. First of all, we accept them as they are. Instead of viewing learners as people who have to sound like a native speaker, we embrace them as bilingual individuals with unique linguistic abilities and experiences, who come to this world with a first language and who are not afraid of code switching and making mistakes. Overall, I hope for the promotion of a new perspective on language use, encouraging learners to embrace translanguaging and code switching as a valid communication strategies. This approach fosters language fluidity and allows learners to leverage all available linguistic resources to express themselves effectively. This presentation touched upon 4 key points. Linguistic empowerment. We can recognize bilingualism as a valuable asset. For cultural enrichment, embracing bilingualism promotes cultural diversity and fosters great understanding and appreciation of different linguistic backgrounds. In terms of inclusive practices, we can develop more inclusive teaching strategies that cater to their unique needs and strengths. And for redefining success, it should not be measured solely by native-like proficiency, so there is now an open invitation to redefine success. Hemos aprendido sobre los beneficios de ser bilingüe y aprender un segundo idioma. Ahora, a los estudiantes de una segunda lengua, como yo, los considero bilingües desde el momento que comienzan a aprender el idioma. Si pensamos en los estudiantes como bilingües, sucederán cosas buenas. Primero, los aceptamos tal y como son. En lugar de ver a los estudiantes como personas que tienen que hablar como un hablante nativo, los aceptamos como individuos bilingües con habilidades y experiencias lingüísticas únicas, que vienen a este mundo con un primer idioma y que no temen cambiar de código ni cometer errores. En general, espero promover una nueva perspectiva sobre el uso del lenguaje, animando a los estudiantes a adoptar el translenguaje y el cambio de código como estrategias comunicativas válidas. Este enfoque fomenta la fluidez del lenguaje y permite a los estudiantes aprovechar todos los recursos lingüísticos disponibles para expresarse de manera efectiva. En esta presentación hablé sobre 4 puntos claves. El empoderamiento lingüístico. Podemos reconocer el bilingüismo como algo valioso. El enriquecimiento cultural. Aceptar el bilingüismo promueve la diversidad cultural y fomenta una mayor comprensión y apreciación de los diferentes orígenes lingüísticos. En términos de las prácticas inclusivas, podemos desarrollar estrategias de enseñanza más allá y satisfagan sus necesidades y fortalezcan su aprendizaje. Y podemos redefinir el éxito. No debe medirse únicamente por el dominio de hablar como un hablante nativo, por lo que ahora os quiero invitar a redefinir el éxito. As we have seen throughout this presentation, there are many positive outcomes to speaking and knowing a second language. I would like to end with one of the comments by Javier. He mentioned that he always considered the effort and resources spent on enhancing his daughter's English skills as an investment in her future, rather than merely an expense. Now, at the age of 10, her proficiency in English, especially in terms of pronunciation and fluency, seems to have overtaken his own. This progression confirms that the approach they have taken has been fruitful. Como hemos visto a lo largo de esta presentación, hablar y conocer un segundo idioma tiene muchos resultados positivos. Me gustaría terminar con uno de los comentarios de Javier. Él mencionó que siempre consideró el esfuerzo y los recursos invertidos en mejorar las habilidades de inglés de su hija como una inversión en su futuro y no simplemente como un gasto. Ahora, a la edad de 10 años, su dominio del inglés, especialmente en términos de pronunciación y fluidez, parece haber superado el de él. Esta progresión confirma que el enfoque que han adoptado ha sido fructífero. Me gustaría agradecer a Madeline por su invitación. Gracias a todos por su tiempo y atención. Si tenéis alguna pregunta, me podéis preguntar en inglés o en español.
Ahora, si alguien tiene una pregunta para Reinaldo, quiero darte el micrófono. Anybody has a question for Reinaldo, I can give you the microphone. Any questions? Okay. If you have a question later on your sheet, you have Reinaldo's email. Si tienen una pregunta después, tiene su correo electrónico. Kylie?
Hello, thank you so much. I was really curious about the one study talking about bilingualism, and it was saying that it was not like the same as having like monolingual fluency in each, because I grew up speaking Spanish and English. So could you like elaborate on that? Like, how does that work when you're thinking like a word? Is it automatically being translated in your head, or are you thinking in each language like separately?
Yeah, are you referring to the study that I presented with the results?
Yes, yeah, it sounded really interesting, but I wonder if you could elaborate a little.
Yeah, this one is different. This one was for second language learners, so they're not necessarily bilinguals. They're just being learning the language from scratch, from the very beginning. And what this means is that they're basically were able to recognize the words, but without knowing them. So behaviorally, meaning how they were behaving to these words, they were noticing that they didn't know if the words were real or not, but their brains somehow were catching those differences in the responses. But in terms of the bilingual vocabulary, we know that we have double representation of words. So, for example, you can say perro and dog. So those will be two different terms. But because you have two languages, so the bilingual repertoire, it's larger, but at the same time, you have double meanings in the same words. Does that answer your question, or you were looking for something in particular?
No, yeah, that does. That's super interesting. Thank you.
No worries. Should I translate it, or the interpreters can do it for me?
¿Alguien necesita una interpretación de Reinaldo en español de esa respuesta? Ok. Pues vamos a continuar con el próximo testimonio. We're going to continue with the next testimonial. Thank you very much, Reinaldo.
Gracias a todos. Desafortunadamente me tengo que ir para una clase, pero que la paséis bien. Hasta luego.
Chao.
Chao.
Okay. Okay. La próxima. Next one.
Alexia, please introduce yourself and tell us your experience dealing with English.
Hi, my name is Alexia. I'm 10 years old and I'm going to share with you my experience learning English. I started at Michael Nursery when I was 1 year old. Since then, I have been learning English for 9 years. I always watch videos and documentaries in English, and it's really easy for me to use English in real life. The subject I like the most is natural science, and my favorite topic is the human body. I have a lot of teachers who speak English, and for me it's very easy to understand them. But almost all of my friends struggle speaking and understanding English so easily as me and my friend Noelia. I think this is due I have always watched, listened, and read content in English. My favorite book is the collection of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and my favorite title is Dog Days. It is really funny because in that story, Greg does a lot of crazy things. My most beloved singer is Olivia Rodrigo and the song Stranger. By the way, I only listen clean versions because the explicit versions are not for my age. When watching movies or TV series, my favorites are Harry Potter saga and The Loud House, where a lot of kids with their 4 pets and parents live under the same roof, and it's a huge mess. I grew up to love English, and nowadays I don't mind to use it in everyday tasks, to communicate with my teachers or friends, or for consuming content in any format, listening, watching, or reading.
Ahora otro testimonio para esta parte de presentación.
Hi, my name is Kevin. I'm 24, almost 25. I'm finishing my study on physics through the University of La Laguna. A long journey and hard work to achieve the goal, being honest, but I don't regret yet. The reason of learning English could be encompassed in two states, studies and communication. So, during the career has been fundamental knowing English, at least the ability to understand the bibliography correctly and some text for developing on every subject that requires fairly effort. However, it has been necessary to know how to pronounce because I was not exposed in that way. In line with this, a change of mentality has raised me up for learning English as a tool of communication. That gave me the opportunity of knowing people from other countries. And not only that, I was not even conscious at all about the huge importance of learning English because I have to express myself in this foreign language. In most of cases, I want to still researching in physics. For that, one of my fundamental motivation to improve my language skills is getting enough confidence and fluently to express myself how I really desire. Firstly, I learned English as a first contact at school, high school, but it was the best in teaching. So after a while, I decided to learn English by an academy. And the experience was totally different because they were paying attention to me to improve my English. Afterwards, a few years later, a helpful tool was the next two channel via YouTube, English with Ronnie and Accent Ways English with Adar. Regarding the beginning with Ronnie has been more useful due to the progression from low level to high level is well designed. Besides, Hadas has developed in her channel a marvelous content about how to pronounce and getting the proper reading, intonation and fluency. The last one I highly recommend because in my short experience she has been more useful than all my last teachers from the past, excepting the teacher for the academy. Then, something that absolutely doesn't work for me is learning new vocabulary, grammar, expressing whatever you can imagine without knowing how to pronounce it. It's kind of frustrating to know many words or phrases and not able to express yourself due to the lack of pronunciation. Anyways, at the time you are speaking with people of your own country or have the same level than you, it doesn't matter. But talking with a native speaker could be a nightmare. In addition to this, no English hasn't opened any door yet because my actual English is quite normal and improved, but I hope in the future that it will be a fundamental skill who help me to attain my personal goals. Finally, I have the following question for the language experts. What is the most significant skill or skills that you really appreciate when someone is learning a language?
Gracias, Kevin. Y ahora voy a dejar de compartir. I'm going to stop sharing and Kate, go ahead. Puedes seguir adelante. You can start.
Okay. Let's see. Slideshow. Okay, thank you, Madeline. Can you hear me okay? So we heard two testimonials about two students and kind of what made them feel more comfortable or connected to English as their second language. And my presentation will try to explain a little bit about why that feeling of connection was made. There is actually some theory behind it, and we can then use that theory and apply it to everybody else's, the structure of how we can learn language so that learning a language is easier, more accessible, and makes it feel like it's more fun as well. So to start, a lot of language classes focus on the 4 skills. So to learn a language, we know that we need to know how to read it, write in it, listen to it, and speak it. So we will sometimes see classes that are broken up into these individual skills, or they will combine listening and speaking in one class and reading and writing in another class. I want to argue that while all of these skills are absolutely important, we don't necessarily want to keep them separated. When do we only listen in isolation with language? When do we only speak in isolation? We don't. Everything is very integrated, and we can take advantage of this and structure a language course or a language class in a certain way that actually optimizes using these skills and developing all of these skills in a way that makes more sense for how we're wired. So instead of the 4 skills, I want to posit that we should instead be thinking about the 4 strands. This was introduced by Paul Nation in 2007. And the 4 strands are comprehensible input, language-focused instruction, meaningful output, and fluency development. And I will elaborate on what exactly each of these 4 skills are. The first is comprehensible input. So we want to start a lesson or a course here. Input means receiving language. So either listening to language or reading language. And this could be conversation, movies, TV, podcasts, audiobooks, music, or just any type of reading. All of this is language that we are receiving. The second strand is language-focused instruction. And this is probably what many people are most familiar with in their language classes. So this is where we would explicitly learn grammar, vocabulary, but also pronunciation is technically a system. And if you've had language teacher training before or have experienced the PPP method, this is where we might see that PPP, present the language, practice that language from controlled to less controlled practice, and finally start to produce that language, maybe under more controlled circumstances. The third strand is where we have meaningful output. So we started with input, which is our reading and our listening, where we're receiving language, and then we are gradually moving to our output. So this could be speaking or writing, but it's most important that we are producing meaningful output. So we're focused on our meaning, and there's some type of communication goal or contextualized objective. If you think about why do we use language? Well, we use language because it's necessary for us to communicate something. Language is all about communication. So our brains are wired to think about, well, what do I need or want to say, the meaning? And then it switches to, if this is the meaning that I want to make, how do I form that? So what is the form that then I want to make? And that is why it's really difficult for us to be focusing on meaning and form at the same time. For native speakers, we're making that flip in our brain automatically. So when we're studying language, it just takes a little bit more time to go from the meaning to the form. And organizing our lesson in this way allows us to take that time. So it's most important to have the input. We're contextualizing language. We're being primed for the meaning. What does it mean? Now let's zoom in with language-focused instruction and study the form of that meaning. And then we move to, okay, now we are putting ourselves in that situation and communicating the same type of output that we saw at the beginning and received. And I can pause for interpretation now if that's good. Should I stop sharing?
Can you stop sharing?
Yes. Mhm.
¿Se me oye bien? ¿Me oís? Sí, vale. Bueno, muchas gracias, Madi. Hemos oído dos testimonios de dos estudiantes que nos han dicho qué y cómo han aprendido inglés como segunda lengua. Así que ahora voy a explicarles cómo se hacen esas conexiones y cómo se produce ese sentimiento. Estas conexiones se deben a una teoría que voy a explicar a continuación y que después se puede aplicar para el aprendizaje de otras lenguas, para que sea más fácil aprenderlas, más accesible y también más divertido. En la mayor parte de las clases de idiomas vemos que se centran en las 4 destrezas o habilidades clásicas, que son leer, escribir, escuchar y hablar. En estas clases se desarrollan estas destrezas de manera individual o combinándolas. Y a mí me gustaría decir que, bueno, estas destrezas son importantes, pero no me parece tan importante aprenderlas por separado, porque nunca vamos a solo escuchar algo o solo hablar, sino que lo vamos a hacer de manera integrada. Así que si podemos estructurar estas 4 habilidades, podremos saber cómo utilizarlas y organizar una clase en la que se optimicen y se desarrollen todas las destrezas. Así que en vez de hablar de las 4 destrezas, a mí me gusta más hablar de los 4 pilares, que es una teoría que se desarrolló en el año 2007 y que se basa en unos datos de recepción comprensibles, una enseñanza basada en la lengua, una producción con significado y por último un desarrollo de la fluidez. Así que ahora voy a desarrollar un poco en qué consiste esta teoría. Y primero vamos a centrarnos en la recepción comprensible. Aquí es donde recibimos la información de una lengua y, por ejemplo, lo hacemos a través de la escucha o de la lectura. Y esto lo podemos hacer a través de programas de televisión o podcast o incluso leyendo. Todo esto son características de la lengua que recibimos. En segundo lugar está la enseñanza centrada en la lengua, que es en lo que seguramente estén más familiarizados y es donde se enseña la gramática, el vocabulario y también la pronunciación. Así que si alguna vez han tenido formación en dar clase o han visto en qué consiste la técnica de la pronunciación y de la pronunciación y la práctica y la producción, sabrán que esta es una de las bases de la enseñanza de una lengua y que se pasa de una práctica controlada a una práctica menos controlada y después a una producción. En tercer lugar, tenemos la producción con significado, que es en la que empezamos a poner en práctica esta recepción del lenguaje a través, que la habíamos recibido a través de la lectura y de la escucha, y la ponemos en práctica a través de hablar y escribir. Y es muy importante centrarse en esta producción con significado y tener un objetivo claro y contextualizado. Las lenguas son muy importantes porque las necesitamos para comunicarnos. Nuestro cerebro funciona de una manera en la que piensa qué es lo que necesito decir para poder comunicarme y cómo necesito decirlo para darle el significado que quiero. Así que entonces nos centramos en la forma. Al aprender un idioma puede ser un poco difícil centrarnos a la vez en el significado y en la forma. Y esto le ocurre a las personas que aprenden una segunda lengua. Por lo tanto, es muy importante que en la parte de la recepción esté muy contextualizado y sepamos todo lo que quiere decir para después centrarnos en un aprendizaje centrado en la lengua, estudiemos la forma y así podamos poner en práctica la comunicación. Y lo voy a dejar ahí para que las intérpretes puedan interpretar. Muchas gracias.
Ok. Gracias, Irene y Kate. Y vamos a hacer la segunda parte. We're going to do the second part now.
Okay. Connecting the 4 strands and the testimonials from Alexia and Kevin. We'll start with Alexia. Alexia talked a lot about how she thought that her connection and ability to use English was really because of how much media she had consumed from TV shows, movies, and all of that. And that does make sense when we're thinking about how the 4 strands can support language learning. So what she was probably talking about was the comprehensible input. Anytime she watched a movie or a TV show, and her dad had also talked about how she would rely on the visuals. So that is a key indicator that she was using visual priming to help support her then language learning. So she was primed with the visuals to understand the context, and all of the language within that movie or TV show was related to whatever was going on in that scene. So everything was primed and related in that input and contextualized. And again, she was watching, she was listening, and she was reading. So she was receiving a great deal of input. At the beginning, when she was younger, that might have been a little bit too much input and too much information, because when she was starting her language journey, I'm sure that the level of English that they were speaking was not just one level above what she was capable of. It was probably much, much higher, which is why she was relying so much on the visuals to help support her understanding. But as the input increased and she became more conscious of the priming and related language, then she's able to follow it a lot more. She also talked a lot about communication with her teachers or friends in everyday tasks. So here is a great example of how she has discovered this use of meaningful output for her language learning. With this communication with family, friends, and teachers, the everyday tasks that she's doing are communicating meaning. She's not producing English out of context or in a practice session. She's starting with something that she wants to communicate, and then she is achieving that contextualized objective or goal. So she was able to use input and output to develop her language learning. If she had had the language-focused instruction within those 2 strands, I'm sure she would even have progressed even faster with her language learning. Moving to Kevin's testimonial, he talked about two other aspects of language learning where he felt that he was getting the most value. First, he talked a little bit about the scaffolding. The progression of his language learning or his language classes met him in what we call his zone of proximal development. So it was meeting him at the appropriate level of challenge and increasing the challenge bit by bit. This type of scaffolding is exactly what we can see in the 4 strands progression, where we receive language, we see it contextualized, and we're primed to understand the meaning. And then we zoom in, we're using the same type of text and situation, and we understand how to form that meaning, and we practice it gradually, and then move to that meaningful output, where then we produce that same meaning that we received and studied. So in this case, we're moving step by step through a progression that makes sense with how our brain is wired. He also talked a little bit about his appreciation of language-focused instruction, in particular pronunciation. He did not appreciate when grammar and vocabulary was decontextualized, because the decontextualization takes it out of a goal or an objective. Why am I learning these language features in isolation? I don't have a meaningful goal to accomplish with them. But for him, pronunciation is a very tangible goal that he needs, and it's a necessity in order to communicate. And he is absolutely right that pronunciation is much more than phonetics. It's also rhythm, it's intonation, it's part of fluency. And he really hit upon the fact that all language systems, grammar, vocabulary, each one of them should study the meaning of that form, how to form it, and then also the pronunciation. Without the pronunciation, if you're just studying how to form something without looking at the meaning and also not knowing how to pronounce it, then you're only learning a partial bit of that language. You're not getting the full picture, and you're not increasing your communicative competence in that way. I'll pause there for just conclusion. Structuring your language learning experience with all 4 strands and using them in the scaffolded order from receiving language input, language-focused instruction to study, and then production for meaningful output makes your learning easier, more effective, and also more intuitive. So, do you have any questions? And thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And we will do the consecutive interpretation now.
Vale. ¿Se me oye? Ah, vale. No, pero eso. Vale. Este es el cuarto pilar, que es el desarrollo de la fluidez. Y ahora vamos a hablar de los testimonios de Alexia y Kevin. En primer lugar, hablaremos del testimonio de Alexia, en la que ella hablaba de cómo pensaba que sus conexiones alrededor de la lengua inglesa se habían creado a través de ver diferentes medios audiovisuales como la televisión o series, y así tenía sentido cómo se habían establecido los 4 pilares de los que hablaba antes. Estos medios audiovisuales los podemos ver como una recepción del lenguaje comprensible. Como digo, en la televisión y en las series, los estímulos visuales son clave para poder entenderlo. Entonces, ella recibía unos estímulos visuales que eran una base y eran clave para poder entender la lengua en un contexto y así relacionarlo con las imágenes. Alexia veía las imágenes, escuchaba y también leía. Al principio puede ser que fuera demasiada información, porque el nivel de los estímulos visuales que ella veía no se adecuaba al que tenía en el primer momento, pero poco a poco, según fue consumiendo más productos audiovisuales en inglés, fue aumentando su nivel y lo fue entendiendo más. Entonces, cuanto más estímulos recibía y más recepción tenía, más consciente era de la lengua y más fácil le era seguirlos y entenderlos. También habló de cómo se comunicaba con sus profesoras, sus amigas y sus familiares utilizando una producción con sentido y con significado. Y así, comunicándose con sus familiares y con sus profesores, hacía las tareas del día a día y producía la lengua inglesa con un significado. Así que no se puede aprender una lengua, en este caso el inglés, fuera de contexto. Empezaba pensando en lo que quería comunicarse y después le daba un contexto y lo producía. También creo que si ella hubiera estado expuesta a una enseñanza centrada en la lengua, habría progresado mucho más rápido. Y ahora pasamos al testimonio de Kevin. Él comentaba dos aspectos en su proceso de aprendizaje de la lengua. En primer lugar, hablaba de la estructura que había seguido, que nos lleva a hablar de una zona de desarrollo próximo. Y esto es la forma en la que se empezaba en un nivel apropiado para el que estaba él y después iba avanzando en la lengua. La estructura que él utilizaba para aprender el idioma le hacía entender el significado y después centrarse en cómo formar las palabras. Después hacía una producción con significado y así producía lo que había aprendido. Entonces él aprendió poco a poco y también hablaba de cómo apreciaba la enseñanza centrada en la lengua, sobre todo respecto a la pronunciación. No le gustaba mucho la forma de aprender vocabulario y gramática sin contexto, porque él pensaba que no debía aprender esto sin un objetivo claro. Pero para él la pronunciación era clave y era uno de los objetivos que tenía para poder comunicarse más fácilmente. Y estaba en lo cierto, la pronunciación es mucho más que la fonética, tiene que ver con el ritmo y con la fluidez. Y considera que todos los sistemas de aprendizaje de una lengua deberían estudiar el significado y relacionarlo con la forma y la pronunciación, porque sin la pronunciación solo tendrían el significado de las palabras y solo aprenderían la lengua de manera parcial y entonces no avanzarían en la comunicación. Así que, como conclusión, me gustaría decir que la estructura es muy importante a la hora de aprender una lengua y que hay que empezar por la recepción de información, después una formación y una enseñanza centrada en la lengua y, por último, una producción con significado, para que así aprender una lengua sea más fácil, más divertido y más intuitivo. Muchas gracias.
Y ahora para preguntas para Kate y podemos hacer las interpretaciones entre inglés y español. Entonces no importa si preguntas en español o inglés. ¿Alguien?
Spanish or English, I don't know. Okay, I started in English. So I have a question. For example, when a person is watching a TV show or a movie or serial or whatever, what do you think it's better to switch the subtitles on? Listen to the original version, let's say, the English in this case, and while reading the subtitles in Spanish or while reading subtitles in English so that you can match what you hear to what you read, or nothing at all, just hardcore, just listen to the original language? Because for me, that's something I try to do that so that I can train a bit um, the hearing, and I never know what to do exactly. What's better? Sometimes I have to stop and switch from English to Spanish so that I can, yes, match just what I said, match what I hear to to what I read in English, so that I can understand and learn that word. But it's like very time consuming, and sometimes you lose the track of what you're watching. And sometimes I just go ahead and listen to without anything, and okay. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think again, it kind of depends on where that zone of proximal development is for you. For example, if you feel like you're trying to use enough support that you're feeling a little bit of challenge and not an impossible amount of challenge. And usually if we're doing input, it depends on whether you're working your fluency in the input, because again, fluency doesn't have to just mean speaking. Fluency, you can also develop your listening fluency, your reading fluency, your writing fluency. So it really depends on if you're using that input to study a certain type of language. Like, are you using it to really focus on a specific structure, or are you just using it to develop your fluency? I think the subtitles are a great tool. And it depends on, are you going to use them in a long form to give yourself a little bit of a break from that fluency development? Do you want to completely immerse yourself without any kind of scaffold? You just have that wash over you, and depends on what the gap is between that input and your own level. Because if the gap is too large between your level and your proficiency and the level of language that they're using, if what they're speaking is over, is it like 80 to 90% new language, it's not going to do much good. But if you feel like you can understand like 80 to 90% of it, then I think it would be great to use as either something to develop a certain type of language structure for you with just a tiny piece, or if you're just working on developing your fluency, then I feel like using the type of subtitle that will make it slightly challenging but not overwhelmingly challenging is best.
Y gracias que vamos a hacer la interpretación en español para la pregunta y respuesta. We're going to do the interpretation for the question and the answer.
Creo que depende mucho del desarrollo de la lengua que tenga en ese momento y también de los objetivos y el nivel de la fluidez. Tampoco tiene que suponer un reto ver la televisión o una serie. Entonces, depende de las habilidades y del tipo de lenguaje que sea y del punto del desarrollo y del desarrollo de la fluidez. Creo que los subtítulos son una muy buena herramienta si la quieren utilizar para descansar un poco el cerebro o el punto de fluidez en el que estén, o si prefieren estar más inmersos en el documento audiovisual. Y también depende de la estructura de aprendizaje del lenguaje que estén utilizando. Lo más importante es la diferencia que haya entre el documento que estén recibiendo y el nivel del lenguaje en el que estén. Si la diferencia es muy grande, entonces es algo que hay que tener en cuenta. Si, por ejemplo, el 80 o el 90% del vocabulario del lenguaje del documento audiovisual es nuevo, entonces los subtítulos pueden ser una buena herramienta a utilizar. Pero si pueden entender entre el 80 y el 90% de todo lo que se dice en este documento audiovisual, entonces lo pueden utilizar para desarrollar un poco más su fluidez. Pero lo más importante es que ver un documento audiovisual no suponga un reto ni algo muy difícil que hacer.
Irene y Kate. Thank you very much, Irene and Kate. And we'll move on to our final segment, starting with the testimonial for Grace's presentation. Ahora vamos a seguir con el último, empezando con el testimonio antes de la presentación de Grace. El tema. Okay.
I started to study English as a second language in high school, but it wasn't my cup of tea. If the memory serves, I had 1 or 2 hours a week, and it was basically grammar and vocabulary focus. At that time, I really didn't understand the methodology, neither the goals, and although I developed some basic skills and acquired a basic vocabulary, it didn't lay a solid foundation to improve further upon, or at least that is my impression. Later, at the university, English classes were very sparse and with a total lack of motivational awareness, but something changed in my mood about improving my English skills, and the turning point was the need or wish to access some content that was only available in English and to communicate with people from other countries. In that regard, I opted for the classical approach of English courses and hours of study dedicated to grammar and vocabulary without too much practice. My conclusion was that learning English was boring and you spend so much time for so dismissal returns, because when dealing with native speakers or media in the English language, I really struggled to be fluent or have a seamless experience. At a certain point, I gave up on the methodology, but not on the main goal, so I switched over to a more natural learning experience and decided to enjoy media I really like in English and go along. I started reading sci-fi novels, classics I've read in Spanish, and watching movies and TV series all in English. The important thing here was to consume media I really would enjoy and don't care too much about missing some parts. In a short time, I decided to turn off English subtitles. I never tried Spanish subtitles at all, and although at the beginning it was hard to pick up accents, slang, and meaning, I was really committed to this methodology, and nowadays I don't regret doing so. What was the end result? My English is not perfect, and I don't sound like a native English speaker, but I'm not shy to try to communicate in English, and I can understand pretty well. I make a lot of mistakes, but I think they don't hinder my capacity to enjoy a conversation or media content in English. Probably I will not pass an English exam based on grammar or accuracy. When I have to choose between different options or I have to fill the gap in an English exercise, I do it by ear, choosing what it sounds better to me. Not always is right, but it's more than enough in a daily basis usage. Probably the only key component that this methodology lacks is not having too many opportunities to talk in English. I'm sure that I have the proper foundation to really improve my fluency if only I would have the luck of being able to use English in everyday activities or conversations. Here is my 2 cents based on my experience and my assessment about how I developed my English skills or lack of along the years.
Okay. Gracias, Javier. Thank you, Javier. And we will continue with the talk from Grace.
All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, can you hear me?
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you. All right. So when I was introduced in the beginning, Madeline said that I research psycholinguistics and also bilingualism. And today I am going to be talking about how learning a second language or L2 learning and also bilingualism can help impact or improve your cognitive health. But related to Javier's testimonial, I also wanted to talk a little bit about motivation and also methodology in teaching English as a second language, because when I was an undergraduate, I researched a little bit of motivation and second language acquisition. And here at the University of Florida, I am an instructor for our Introduction to Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages class. So I wanted to start by talking about Javier's testimonial. And what we heard was that when Javier started learning English, it was very heavily focused on grammar and also vocabulary instruction, and it was about 1 to 2 hours a week of English instruction. And with this grammar and vocabulary-based instruction, Javier did not particularly like learning English, and what I heard was sort of a lack of motivation to continue with learning English. And then Javier talked about how he started to learn English, or he switched to learning English more naturally by practicing communication. And so using more communicative language, consuming more media in English, and also reading books in English, which he had read in Spanish. So for example, sci-fi, science fiction, and also more classical books. And so the result of this more communicative approach to learning English was easier and more eager communicative ability in English, and also just a wider array of, I'll say, accessible media, but I think more so just a whole new world of communication with both Spanish and also English. And so some of the core tenets of Javier's testimonial that I kind of want to highlight is, first of all, motivation, and second of all, methodology. And I think these go hand in hand. And so when we're talking about motivation, we can talk about, very, very broadly speaking, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is more personal, it's more inward. And for example, maybe you want to be the type of person who can speak English and Spanish, or who can just speak multiple languages and communicate with people from multiple different places. Whereas extrinsic motivation is more external forces make you want to learn a second language, maybe learn English. So an example of extrinsic motivation would be, maybe you work for a company and they say, hey, we'll give you a raise, we'll give you more money if you learn English. And then you can also have demotivation and amotivation. So demotivation is kind of like you were motivated and then something led to your lacking in motivation. So maybe you were very intrinsically motivated, but then you received a bad grade or a bad mark on an exam or an essay, and it made you feel like, you know, maybe I'm not very good at this. And so now you're not very motivated to keep learning. And then there's also amotivation, which is what I heard when I listened to Javier's testimonial. And this is basically just a lack of interest. So for example, me, I'm very intrinsically motivated to keep learning linguistics, but I'm very amotivated for something like, say, chemistry. This is a non-linguistic example, but if someone said, hey, Grace, go learn chemistry, I would say, I'm not very interested in that. So I'm amotivated. And I think, as I said, motivation and methodology go hand in hand. So methods and methodology in English teaching can affect your motivation. And we see this in Javier's testimonial, where he says that grammar and vocabulary instruction were not very interesting. And one of the reasons for this very well could be that they're disconnected from the target language community. Meaning when Javier was only learning grammar and vocabulary in English, he wasn't connected to speakers of English, and he wasn't connected to sort of the world that speaking English or being able to speak English could give him. And so this highlights how communicative approaches to language learning can kind of lend itself to more intrinsic and maybe more extrinsic motivation. And I wanted to highlight this because I think it underscores a little bit some of the difficulties and challenges that we all experience when we start learning a second language. And I think it's important to find ways or find things that do motivate you to keep learning a second language, because it can improve your health and it can connect you to a whole new world that you otherwise would not have if you only spoke your native language. And so now I wanted to talk a little bit about my own language learning experiences, because they've heavily influenced my life, my career, and my studies in linguistics. So I was raised as a monolingual native English speaker, and I took 2 years of French in high school, but until I was 17, I really had very little exposure to languages other than English. And when I was in 11th grade, I was an exchange student in southern Denmark. And so I learned Danish, and I was completely immersed in Danish. I used it every day. I was also using English, but I was using Danish very often. And so I became highly proficient very fast. And so now I'm a speaker of both English and Danish, and I would still consider myself highly proficient in Danish. And learning Danish sparked my interest in psycholinguistics. I wanted to learn more about how the brain processes multiple languages. And the reason for this was that my host brother at the time was only 9 years old. And that's when students in Denmark start learning English in school. And so the exact week that I arrived in Denmark on my exchange year, my host brother started school and he started learning English. And so I was learning his first language, which was Danish, as a second language. And he was learning my first language, English, as a second language. And so we were both learning each other's first languages from the same levels of proficiency, from scratch, from zero. And we were starting at the same point in time. And so that made me wonder if he was processing my first language the same way as a second language. So was he processing English as a second language the same way I do as a first language, and vice versa with Danish? Do I process Danish as a second language the same way my host brother processes it as a first language? And so learning a second language, despite the challenges that I experienced while doing so and all of the many mistakes that I made while learning Danish, it improved and it heavily impacted my life. So I think that it gave me my career as a linguist, and it has given me friends and family globally, and it has given me really exciting and enriching opportunities and fun stories to tell. Still, one of the greatest joys in my life is being able to communicate in my second language. And more broadly speaking, and the point of my talk today, is that there's even some evidence to suggest that learning a second language can improve your cognitive health. Now, there's no way for me to say that learning a second language, that learning Danish, has definitively improved my cognitive health. I'm only one person, I don't know. But generally speaking, there is evidence to suggest that bilingualism, speaking two languages, impacts your brain and it impacts cognition. So I wanted to define health a little bit before I continue on. So health, as we know, is very multidimensional. Health encompasses your social health, your emotional health, your physical health, and also your cognitive health. And to be healthy, you largely need social connections. It's important to have positive experiences. You need to have both social and emotional support. And for cognitive health, you need to have cognitively challenging activities, something that challenges your brain. And these are all very important to maintain your health. And so speaking of cognitively challenging activities, this brings me to talking about bilingualism. So bilingualism, unbeknownst to us, can be considered a cognitively challenging activity because...
Sorry to interrupt. Can you pause so we can do an interpretation up until that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Buenas a todos. Ya me ha presentado Madi antes y, como ha dicho, yo me centro en la investigación, en la psicolingüística y en el bilingüismo. Y hoy me gustaría hablarles de cómo el aprendizaje de una segunda lengua es un puente hacia una vida sana y hacia una mejora en la vida. Pero antes me gustaría empezar a hablar del testimonio de Javier y también de cómo ha relacionado su experiencia a la hora de aprender inglés. Porque él nos comienza a contar que no estaba demasiado motivado al aprender una segunda lengua y que le costaba un poco centrarse en la gramática y en el vocabulario. Dedicaba 1 o 2 horas a la semana al aprendizaje del inglés y la verdad es que no le pareció emocionante el hecho de aprender una nueva lengua así. Entonces le faltaba la motivación a la hora de aprender inglés. Y entonces nos habla de que cambió su forma de aprender y se centró en una forma mucho más práctica y más natural. Se centró en la comunicación y en el acceso a medios de comunicación y contenido en inglés. Empezó a leer libros en inglés que antes había leído en español, libros de ciencia ficción u otros más clásicos. Así que decidió centrarse en un punto de vista más comunicativo. Y, en consecuencia, consiguió una capacidad comunicativa más fácil y ávida en inglés y un acceso a una mayor variedad de contenido. En realidad, tuvo acceso a un nuevo mundo de posibilidades y de contenido tanto en inglés como en español. Me gustaría hablar de algunos puntos claves del testimonio de Javier. En primer lugar, él ha hablado de la motivación y creo que está muy ligado a la metodología. La motivación en general puede ser de 2 tipos, intrínseca y extrínseca. La intrínseca tiene que ver con lo personal, con algo que queremos nosotros mismos. Por ejemplo, queremos aprender un idioma o queremos saber hablar inglés y español para tener más capacidad de comunicación o para hablar con personas de otros países. Y la motivación extrínseca tiene que ver con las fuerzas externas. Quizá no es algo que hayamos decidido por nuestro propio pie, sino que a lo mejor trabajamos en una empresa y nos han prometido que si aprendemos inglés cobraremos más dinero. Pero también es importante hablar de la desmotivación. Esto significa que en algún momento estábamos motivados, pero algo nos ha hecho desmotivarnos por completo en el proceso del aprendizaje. Quizá hemos recibido una mala nota que nos ha hecho perder el interés por aprender. Pero además tenemos la amotivación. Cuando he escuchado el testimonio de Javier, me ha recordado a esto. Era una falta de interés, más bien. Y es que quizá tenemos interés en un ámbito, por ejemplo, en aprender una lengua, pero no tenemos motivación para aprender algo completamente diferente, como podrían ser las ciencias de química. A mí, si ahora me dicen, Grace, vete a estudiar química, les diría que la verdad para mí es una motivación total y no me apetece nada. Así que creo que la metodología y la motivación están claramente ligadas. Como hemos visto, centrarse en la gramática y en el vocabulario no ayudó a Javier a que emergiese su interés por el inglés. Se sentía de alguna forma desconectado de la comunidad de la lengua meta. Entonces no se sentía conectado a todo un mundo de posibilidades que le podría abrir el hecho de aprender inglés y de comunicarse con otras personas. Así que por ello decidió enfocarse en la comunicación. Como vemos, ya lo he dicho, esta motivación puede ser intrínseca o extrínseca. Me gustaría resaltar esto porque refleja la experiencia que seguramente todos hemos tenido a la hora de aprender una nueva lengua. Hay que buscar algo que nos motive, porque aprender una nueva lengua mejora nuestra salud, nos conecta con un nuevo mundo al que no podríamos tener acceso si solo aprendiésemos una lengua o si nos quedásemos con nuestra lengua nativa. Así que, en mi opinión, aprender un nuevo idioma me ha aportado experiencias vitales y me ha encaminado en mi trayectoria profesional. Personalmente, me gustaría contarles un poco mi experiencia. Yo nací en un entorno monolingüe, estudié 2 años francés, pero hasta los 17 años no había tenido experiencias con otros idiomas. Y con esta edad me fui de intercambio a Dinamarca. Allí estuve inmersa en la cultura de Dinamarca y aprendí danés y lo hablaba cada día. Es cierto que seguía hablando inglés, pero casi cada día utilizaba el danés. Así que muy rápidamente conseguí un buen nivel de danés y ahora sigo siendo hablante de ambos idiomas. Aprender danés despertó mi interés por aprender la psicolingüística. Mi hermano de acogida, que en ese momento tenía 9 años, es la edad en la que los estudiantes en Dinamarca comienzan a aprender inglés en el colegio. De hecho, yo llegué a Dinamarca y en esa misma semana fue cuando él comenzó a aprender inglés en el colegio. Así que yo empecé a aprender su primera lengua como segunda lengua y viceversa. Empezamos con el mismo nivel, desde cero y al mismo tiempo. Así que me preguntaba cómo se procesaría toda esta información, cómo procesaría él el aprendizaje de mi primera lengua como segunda lengua y cómo procesaría yo el aprendizaje de su primera lengua como mi segunda lengua. Así que aprender una segunda lengua me empezó a interesar mucho y es verdad que cometía muchos errores cuando comencé con el danés, pero mejoró mucho e impactó de una forma muy positiva en mi vida. Me proporcionó, me encaminó en mi carrera profesional, me dio muchos amigos y familia alrededor del mundo y me dio también muchísimas experiencias muy enriquecedoras e historias muy divertidas y además ahora estoy muy contenta de poder decir que me puedo comunicar perfectamente en las dos lenguas. Incluso hay pruebas de que aprender una segunda lengua puede mejorar la salud cognitiva. Yo la verdad es que soy una sola persona, así que no puedo comprobar si a mí me ha pasado y si he mejorado mi salud cognitiva, realmente no lo sé. Pero en general el bilingüismo ayuda a la mejora del cerebro y del conocimiento. Así que ahora me gustaría definir qué es la salud. La salud es un ámbito muy polifacético, incluye la salud social, la salud emocional, la salud física y cognitiva. Hay algunos aspectos que necesitamos aspectos de conexiones sociales, experimentar diferentes ámbitos positivos y necesitamos también el apoyo social y emocional, además de actividades que supongan un reto cognitivo para nosotros. Todo esto ayuda a mantener buenos niveles de salud. Y ahora me gustaría pasar a hablar del bilingüismo concretamente.
Ahora es la hora de la parte segunda. Okay, so Grace, you can start with the second part. Oh, now we can't hear you. Share your audio.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to give a little bit of an overview of bilingualism and cognition and why bilingualism can be considered a cognitively challenging activity. So most bilingual speakers who are regularly code switching probably don't realize the cognitive tax, so to speak, or how cognitively challenging it is to be able to switch from one language to another. So researchers who research bilingualism, study bilingualism, they have long written that bilingualism can lend itself to more efficient, what we call cognitive control, among other benefits. And one reason for this that I will talk about in more detail on the next slide is that switching between two languages requires a lot of shifting of attention and some other details. So first, I want to define cognitive control a little bit in simple terms so that we all can understand it. So in very simple terms, cognitive control can be exemplified by, for example, multitasking. So a non-linguistic example of cognitive control and multitasking would be shifting or switching your attention back and forth between multiple things in one's environment. So for example, let's say you are cooking and you're watching TV at the same time and the oven beeps. You need to switch your attention from the TV to the oven so that you can perform all of the tasks you need to in the kitchen. A more linguistic and I'll say topically relevant example is code switching. So switching between two languages. If you are an English-Spanish bilingual, being able to switch between English and Spanish back to English, even in the same conversation. When you are speaking two languages, both of your languages are active at the same time. So this is one of the biggest reasons why bilingualism might lend itself to more efficient cognitive control. So even when we are not aware of this happening, or when this is happening unconsciously, as it largely does, a bilingual's two languages are always active, and so you are always shifting your attention from one language to another, and if you're code switching, then back to the first. So for me, English and Danish are always active at the same time. They're simultaneously active, even though I mostly only use English in my day-to-day life. So for me, cognitively, for any bilingual, cognitively, this means that unconsciously, sometimes consciously, we're shifting our attention from one language to another. And in some cases, we might be inhibiting the language not in use. So for me, I'm shifting my attention from English back to Danish, or from Danish back to English. And when maybe when I'm not using Danish all the time, I might also be inhibiting Danish, although this would be an unconscious process. So another note about language co-activation is that your degree of activation of the two languages can change. So for me right now, because I rarely use Danish, it's probably not very active in my brain. English is the most active for me right now. But if I were to move to Denmark and I started using Danish all the time, then maybe Danish might become more active than English, even though English is my native language. If you are someone who frequently in your everyday life switches between, say, English and Spanish, then probably English and Spanish are active to very similar degrees. So one other thing that I think is really important to cover about bilingualism, and especially its impacts on cognition, are how we kind of define and think about bilingualism. So in the last decade, 10 years or so, research in bilingualism and cognition has started to investigate both the social and environmental factors that can impact both bilingualism and cognition. And it used to be that we looked at bilingualism as very categorical. So it was you are either monolingual or you're bilingual, and that's it. But now we tend to look at it as more of a continuum of experiences, and we focus more on the bilingual experience as a whole. So there are a lot of factors that can impact one's bilingual experience, and everyone's experience is going to be very different and very unique. My experience speaking two languages is probably very different than everyone else's experience in the room that you're all in right now. So some linguistic factors that might affect bilingualism and also cognition are how many languages are regularly spoken, your age of acquisition of each language, so the age at which you acquired all of your languages, your proficiency level in each languages, the amount of languages you speak, and also how immersed you are in all of your languages. I'm not very immersed in Danish right now, but I am, of course, very immersed in English living in the United States. And then there are also non-linguistic factors that can impact cognition, which are also inextricable from bilingualism and bilingualism research. So some of these factors are exercise, video game experience, which is very cognitively demanding, your career, do you have a high stress or cognitively demanding career? These are all things that can impact cognition. And bilingualism can go beyond just its cognitive impacts, and it can also impact your brain, which we would call neurostructural changes. So research in bilingualism has also shown that in addition to what we call behavioral impacts, it also has neural impacts. So an example of a behavioral impact or behavior is how fast do you respond to stimuli in your environment. If you are participating in an experiment, you might be asked to press one of two keys on a keyboard, depending on what stimulus is presented. And how fast you respond and how accurately you respond would be considered behavioral, because it is an aspect of your behavior in response to some stimulus. But bilingualism can also impact your brain. So for example, one study among many others is Pliatsikas and colleagues, 2017, who found evidence for changes in brain structure in bilinguals who were immersed in their two languages in comparison to monolinguals and also bilinguals who were not immersed in their second language. But I would also like to issue a caution that there is a dissociation between brain and behavior. So Ronaldo talked a little bit about this as well, where what we observe behaviorally is not always seen neurally, and what we see neurally is not always observed behaviorally. So you might experience changes to your brain structure, but that does not necessarily mean that you're going to respond to stimuli any faster. And even if you are shown to, say, respond to stimuli faster and in an experiment, that might not translate to changes in your brain structure. And we'll also see this when we talk about bilingualism and its impacts on dementia or neurodegeneration. So it's also been shown that bilingualism can be helpful in staving off the symptoms of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, which can impact your memory. So bilingualism can help you grow up what is called a cognitive reserve, meaning a reserve or almost a store of behavioral functions that help you function normally or typically, where it would appear that even if there is pathology or pathological clinical changes in your brain, that might not be observed behaviorally because bilingualism and how cognitively demanding it is has helped you grow up a cognitive reserve. So, and this actually is everything that I have prepared. So I would like to say thank you very, very much to everyone in the audience for listening, and also to Madeline and all of our interpreters as well. I am really appreciative to be able to speak with you all today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. And we'll finish with the interpretation of that part before we close.
Ahora me gustaría centrarme en el bilingüismo y en el conocimiento y en por qué el bilingüismo puede considerarse una actividad que supone un reto cognitivo. Muchos bilingües cambian de idioma sin ni siquiera darse cuenta, es un acto reflejo, pero no se dan cuenta precisamente de lo difícil que puede llegar a ser este proceso cognitivo. Las investigaciones que han estado estudiando el bilingüismo se han dado cuenta de que es un proceso muy eficiente y que puede darnos un control cognitivo mayor. Cambiar entre una lengua y otra requiere mucha atención. Por lo tanto, necesitamos un mayor control cognitivo. ¿Y por qué el bilingüismo se prestaría a un control cognitivo más eficaz? Pues para intentar definirlo de una forma simple, podríamos poner el ejemplo de hacer muchas tareas a la vez. Por ejemplo, si nos centramos en algo que no tiene que ver con la lingüística, sería como si estamos cambiando nuestra atención constantemente en algo que estamos variando en un mismo entorno. Por ejemplo, estamos cocinando y viendo la tele, pero también estamos pendientes del reloj del horno. Si el reloj del horno pita, tendremos que cambiar nuestra atención y dirigirla hacia él para poder abarcar todas las tareas a las que estamos enfrentándonos. Otro ejemplo sería el cambio de código entre una persona que habla inglés y español y que puede cambiar de idioma incluso en la misma conversación. Al hablar dos idiomas se potencia este bilingüismo y por lo tanto tenemos un mayor control, aunque sea inconsciente y que cambia siempre las dos lenguas las tenemos activas. Por ejemplo, en mi caso yo tengo el inglés y el danés de forma activa en mi cerebro, incluso ahora que todo mi entorno es inglés y que yo utilizo mucho más el inglés que el danés. Para mí es algo inconsciente cambiar la atención de una lengua a otra. E incluso puedo inhibir un idioma sin darme cuenta de que lo estoy haciendo. Yo, por ejemplo, puedo cambiar entre inglés y danés, como digo, pero cuando no uso el danés, sin darme cuenta, lo inhibo. Otro dato importante es la coactivación del lenguaje. Esto también puede suponer un cambio para nuestro cerebro. Yo hablo danés y es una lengua que tengo más desactivada, pero quizá si me mudase a Dinamarca se convertiría en mi lengua activa, incluso superando al inglés, que es mi lengua nativa. Así que si ustedes hablan inglés y español cada día, quizá el nivel de activación lo tengan a un nivel similar. Algo importante es que el bilingüismo impacta en nuestro conocimiento. Durante 10 años, en los últimos 10 años, se ha estudiado cómo el bilingüismo afecta a los factores sociales y del entorno y cómo puede impactar en nuestro cerebro. Pero se ha visto el bilingüismo de una forma un poco categórica, como clasificando a los monolingües por un lado y a los bilingües por otro. Sin embargo, ahora se ha empezado a estudiar como una experiencia continua. El objetivo del bilingüismo es que la experiencia sea diferente para cada uno, no todos mi experiencia aprendiendo danés no es la misma que la de ustedes que están en la sala y habrán aprendido otro idioma. Cada uno tiene una experiencia diferente. Los factores que influyen en este lenguaje cognitivo es cuántos años, por ejemplo, llevamos hablando esa lengua, a qué edad la aprendimos, con qué frecuencia la utilizamos o cuán inmersos estamos a la hora de utilizar este lenguaje. Si nos centramos en factores no lingüísticos que pueden impactar en nuestro conocimiento, podemos poner los ejemplos del ejercicio, de jugar a videojuegos que requiere una gran atención cognitiva o de nuestro trabajo, porque depende de qué tipo de trabajo tengamos, si es muy exigente o no. El bilingüismo va más allá y puede afectar a nuestro cerebro y a las estructuras neuronales. Las puede cambiar y, de hecho, existen impactos conductuales e impactos neurales. Por ejemplo, en los impactos conductuales se trata de, en un experimento, cuán rápido respondemos a una pregunta que se ha mostrado en la pantalla. Si tenemos que presionar una o dos teclas en el teclado y cuánto tiempo tardamos en hacerlo determinará cuán rápidos somos y cómo ha impactado conductualmente en nuestro cerebro. Pero, como digo, el bilingüismo afecta al cerebro y, como por poner un ejemplo, en un artículo de 2017 de Pliatsíkas y otros autores, se habla precisamente de cómo los cambios en la estructura del cerebro son diferentes en las personas bilingües inmersas y en las monolingües. Hay que tener en cuenta que se tiene que disociar los factores conductuales del cerebro. Es decir, lo que observamos a nivel conductual no siempre se ve a nivel neuronal y viceversa. Los cambios de la estructura del cerebro pueden afectar a cada uno de una forma diferente, pero no siempre va a significar que contestemos al ejemplo del experimento que les he puesto anteriormente de una forma más rápida. Y por último, me gustaría terminar hablando del bilingüismo y la neurodegeneración. El bilingüismo puede ayudar a evitar síntomas que previenen el Alzheimer y puede ayudarnos a construir una reserva neural. Esto significa que si la reserva neural se rompe, si se ha acumulado una reserva cognitiva, el comportamiento continúa como normal. Es una reserva que funciona como un almacén de funciones conductuales que sustentan las estructuras neurales. Y con esto termino mi presentación. Querría dar las gracias a toda la audiencia que ha estado hoy presente aquí. Muchas gracias a Madi por preparar la presentación, gracias a las intérpretes y muchas gracias a todos por estar hoy aquí.
Okay. Okay, muchas gracias, Beatriz, por interpretar. Thank you very much, Beatriz, for interpreting. Thank you, Grace, for the great talk. Now, if there's any questions for Grace, ahora alguien tiene una pregunta para Grace. Antes de cerrar, ¿alguien? Does anybody have a question before we finish? Okay, no questions. So I'm going to conclude. So that will conclude our event today. Thanks again to everyone who played a part in making this event happen, including the testimonial givers, our speakers, our interpreters, my helpers who led you to the right place, Rachel and Claire, thank you, to the tech support and everyone in attendance and watching this after the fact. I hope you enjoyed it and that now you have a greater awareness of how language can be a bridge. That developing as a bilingual is a bridge to culture and society, that language is a bridge to personal connection, and that second language learning is a bridge to a healthy life. Y con esto concluimos el evento de hoy. Gracias a todos los que han participado en este evento. Nuestros testimonios, hablantes, intérpretes, mis ayudantes que les guiaron al sitio correcto. Gracias a Rachel y a Claire. El apoyo técnico y a todas y todos los que asistieron y que han visto la grabación. Espero que lo hayan disfrutado y que ahora sean más conscientes de cómo la lengua puede servir como un puente. Que el desarrollo bilingüe es un puente a la cultura y sociedad. Que la lengua es un puente a la conexión personal y que el aprendizaje de nuevas lenguas es un puente a una vida sana. Gracias y que tengan un buenísimo fin de día. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.